Fallout 4 is a 2015 game by Bethesda Softworks, which takes place in the greater Boston area 200 years after a hypothetical nuclear war demolishes the city and country around it. But if you know anything about Fallout fans and Bostonians, then you know that games have nothing to do with it. The plot centers around the protagonist's goal of finding their son, who was taken from their spouse in the middle of their involuntary 200-year cryosleep in the area's vault, inevitably becoming intertwined in the power struggles between the four major factions vying for influence in the Commonwealth. Like its predecessors, this fifth installation in the mainline Fallout franchise attempts to explore the political and societal struggles of post-war America through the lens of the past, to varying degrees of success. The narrative of the game borrows much of its aesthetics and major locations from Boston's true revolutionary history and contemporary social environment. However, where prior installations in the franchise have effectively used these local histories to say something about America's political environment, Todd can't give us nice things. So much of the local theming comes across as forced and scarcely thought through. As a local of the Boston area, I will attempt to use this essay to explain some of the context behind these decisions, where they might have been able to succeed, and why they tragically fall flat. And make no mistake, I am not coming to critique this game in bad faith. My nefarious, conniving father influenced me to be invested in the Fallout games from a pretty young age, and I still remember the excitement of watching the previews for this game and hearing that it would take place right in my backyard. And full disclosure, I did play it. A lot. I have 10,000 hours on it in my Steam account. This image is not edited. If there's one thing Bethesda excels at, it is making a big sandbox map perfect for exploring. And having a map like that oriented in the area you live is addicting. I don't even think map accuracy is a big deal either. I wonder how accurate it is. Is that an actual thing?
Let me look it up.
No, I'm looking it up. Oh, it's where the Chipotle is.
Oh yeah, I've been there!
I've been there too. That's a nice place to get Chipotle. Any game that aims to encompass such a dense metropolitan area is going to scale itself down to be more practical, or just alter locations entirely to make them more cool and apocalyptic. For instance, the real-life Saugus Ironworks comprises a couple of old wooden colonial buildings and a watermill with some plaques describing its history. Still cool, but mostly in an old-person way. Fallout 4's map designers completely ignored this by implementing it as a massive industrial complex with giant furnaces and vats of molten lava run by raiders with flaming swords. This is unequivocally awesome. My main problem with Fallout 4's design is not that it's not accurate geographically or historically, but that Bethesda absolutely shat the bed with trying to tie a coherent narrative into its setting, one which is ripe with opportunity to explore America's muddled colonial past and current social complexities. What Fallout 4 fails at is best defined by first exploring the successes of its predecessors. At risk of outing myself, my favorite game in the franchise is Fallout New Vegas, in large part because it effectively utilizes and expands upon the history of the Las Vegas region to paint a clear message about the consequence of greed, blind leadership, and putting too much value in the past. Las Vegas was founded as an outpost for pioneers traveling between Salt Lake City and Los Angeles, and later carved out an economic niche for itself in the 1930s as Nevada legalized gambling and the construction of the Hoover Dam brought tons of workers looking to bet and drink away their hard-earned construction money. In the game, not only are you presented with the choice of aligning yourself with a liberal democratic imitation of the pre-war government, a realist colonial dictatorship built on the image of Caesar's Rome, and a hyper-capitalist autocrat representing the corporate interests of New Vegas casinos, but the flaws of each faction are shown to the player in great detail. The message the player is left with is one that ties the value of societal progress in the wasteland to the ability of New Vegas citizens to learn from the mistakes of the past rather than try to embody it, which pretty much all the main factions in the game are trying to do in some way or another. One may make the argument that items in a series shouldn't be judged by the content of their more successful counterparts, but the flaws of Fallout 4 are not simply that it fails to present the same message as New Vegas, but it fails to explore the past and its relationship with the present in anywhere near the same level of detail, despite clearly aiming to do so in its aesthetic sensibilities. Fallout 4 wears the history of the city it takes place in on its sleeve, for better or worse. The first quest the player undertakes upon leaving the Fallout shelter in which they were kept in cryosleep takes them to Concord, where they meet the first major faction, the Minutemen. To beat the quest, one must save the straggling Minutemen from a group of raiders keeping them trapped in a Revolutionary History Museum. Of course, there is something irresistibly cool about using a laser musket to fight your way through this throng of raiders with a backdrop of colonial-dressed mannequins and murals describing the modern history of America in the Fallout canon. But these allusions to the past, upon examination, Minutemen are exactly as they seem on the surface, aesthetic. The Minutemen turn out to be an utterly nondescript group of settlers that have little connection to their historical counterparts apart from their outfits and weaponry. They're just looking to survive the wasteland like anyone else, which is not in itself a bad thing or a concept without precedent in the greater franchise. The followers of the Apocalypse, the objectively best faction in New Vegas, are a group of anarchist humanitarian volunteers who operate solely to assist the most vulnerable parts of the Mojave's population in basic survival and medical care. While they don't have any direct historical counterpart, they're compelling because they have unique ideological motivation and philosophy, which you can directly relate to and engage with. The Minutemen, contrastly, appear to only incidentally relate to the colonial revolutionary forces that they're trying to emulate. They have no revolutionary ideals or ideological parallels to their namesake. They barely have any ideology at all. They don't even seem to be aware of the complex political environment in and around the Commonwealth already. This is a far cry from the true nature of the historical Minutemen, a group who occupied a very specific place in the history of the modern world, and who every Massachusetts elementary schooler has to learn about in every year of social studies class. The American Revolution, along with its counterparts in France and Haiti, was part of the first wave of social upheavals that challenged the old world of conservative European monarchy with the new world of liberal democracy, Enlightenment ideals, and private profit, which has all held up pretty well through the modern day as far as I can tell. The Minutemen were a product of this distinct political climate. They were heavily motivated to use violence and destructive warfare to achieve their goals. Goals that largely revolved around the potential profitability of the American colonies and their desire not to be taxed by mainland England. Mainland England. See, by the time that the Minutemen were actively revolting against colonial authorities, much of the initial mystery and fear around this new world, which had led to conflicts such as King Philip's War between indigenous New Englanders and the colonial populations they were previously allied with, had worn off. What was left, according to the historians Stoughton Lind and David Wallstreicher, was a revolution aimed towards grasping this newfound economic prosperity afforded by the colonial project for those living in it, using the backdrop of Enlightenment ideals of equality and liberty as justification. In the current climate of opinion, in which American revolutionaries are said to have simply rebelled against big government in favor of personal liberties, a renewed appreciation of the economic dimensions of independence can help call into question self-serving definitions of American political ideals that sever political history from political economy, including slavery. The designers and writers of Fallout 4 seem to understand this complex history on at least some level, with their constant allusions to Boston's revolutionary past. The Minutemen's questline sees them seek control over Castle Island and Fort Independence, an early symbol of the young country's independence. And you simply can't escape from these join or die posters littered everywhere. But Fallout 4 is reluctant to engage with the city's history in any meaningful way. Not the violent revolutionary spirit that has served as a form of sentimental nationalism for American centuries in the future, nor the material motivations that drove the Minutemen to revolt in the first place, nor the more troubled aspects of the group's history, contributing to the destruction of Native American civilization or its support of and reliance on slavery in spite of its seemingly contradictory ideals. With the range of factions seeking to exert their influence over the Commonwealth, which we will talk about later, the Minutemen have the potential to emulate this grassroots rebellion for the sake of the survivors living in the Commonwealth already. Maybe they could tar and feather Paladin Dance or something. Or set up networks of security around the Commonwealth to root out the Institute agents replacing people with synths. You could even tie in the settlement's trade route mechanic and have a plot surrounding the Minutemen monopolizing the system of free trade around the Commonwealth. But at the end of the day, the Fallout 4 Minutemen are even less toothless than their depiction in the animated educational program Liberty's Kids.
Imagine how silly he's going to look covered with tar and feathers. He'll look like a giant barn owl. Hooty hoot! I'm Hooty the Sailor!
Even the reasons why a post-apocalyptic settler group might use the image of the Minutemen as an ideological motivator for disillusioned survivors are never investigated. These failings makes the game's inclusion of the Minutemen seem shallow and poorly thought out, or at least shoehorned in to tie the shitty settlement building gameplay into a main quest. This superficiality can be identified in various aspects of the game's narrative design. The antagonistic shadow organization known as the Institute, named for the in-universe equivalent of MIT, a small local university you may have heard of, has thematically nothing to do with the very real tensions between Bostonian locals and the class of students and academic elite across the river. You get some sense of this hearing NPCs talk fearfully about the Institute replacing their peers with robots in the night, and you may be misled into thinking the game is going to do something actually meaningful with this when you explore Cambridge and the area around MIT, only to find it infested with the Institute's prototypical synthetic humans. But there's no nuance or reason behind the actions of the Institute at all. When you meet them in their underground luxury bunker, they come across more like children excited about their toys than a group of morally ambiguous people actually trying to improve the world above them with their technology, which may not be necessarily inaccurate when compared to the average MIT or Harvard student, but don't mistake this laziness for thoughtful satire. You can find a whole new point of comparison for these guys in Fallout New Vegas as well, specifically in the Old World Blues DLC, which focuses on a group of immortal robot scientists who have isolated themselves from the rest of the world surrounded by their outlandish technological advances, so stuck in the past that they can't see the future, much less the present. This conceptually aligns with the idea of the Institute as this group of scientists who have the resources and technology to improve the conditions of those on the surface, but who are too afraid of the present conditions of the world to begin to do any good. But even with these seemingly obvious thematic questions, again, the game's writing fails to explore this on any level, or the Institute as a whole aside from the fact that they're evil and shady and like to replace people with robots. It's like Todd watched Blade Runner and liked the idea of robots that look like humans and the moral questions that presents, but failed to understand the themes of dehumanization and consciousness that made that movie meaningful. The only reason I can think to include the Institute as a main faction would be to give the game a standard villain, and include the twist that the protagonist's son actually has taken over as the organization's head. Which, yeah, that sure happens. But it doesn't make the story more interesting or build off anything established before, mainly because there was nothing to build off in the first place. The only other faction exclusive to this game is the Railroad, an underground network of smugglers that bring synthetic humanoids made by the Institute to safety, which has little going for it aside from its similarities to its namesake, the Underground Railroad, a real-life network of abolitionists that aim to help escaped slaves reach freedom, with notable history in the Boston area. Not a lot of people think of New England as having a very rich history of slavery, as the concentration of slaves in the region was not nearly as high as other areas in the South. But like all regions of antebellum America, the region's economy still depended on slave labor in other colonies, and both African and Native American slaves were often kept in households in the North for some time. Where Massachusetts does stand out is in its Supreme Court's 1783 ruling denying its citizens the ability to keep humans as property, which made it the first state to do so. Another major move the state made later to protect the rights of slaves was the 1855 Personal Liberty Act, which was issued in reaction to federal laws that sought to return fugitive slaves to their owners and made attempting to do so in the state incredibly difficult. What's funny is that the major role of education in the social and political environment of the state, especially in the city of Cambridge itself, which has long been one of the most politically progressive cities in the region, being one of the earliest US cities to use ranked choice voting in city elections, often played a major role in passing progressive laws like this across the board, which perhaps undermines the aimed depiction of the Institute as shady and regressive. I'm being nitpicky though. Massachusetts was far from the only state to issue a law like this, but the point of abolition having a long and complex history in the region still stands, and there seems to be plenty of interesting ideas the writers have at their disposal. Not like comparing the agency of robots to civil rights can lead to any weird thematic comparisons, right? Jabs at David Cage aside, there are obvious implications that come when equating the goal of slavery abolition to the treatment of human-looking robots created to literally replace people who already exist. But let's do our best to work with what the game's got so far. There are obvious existential questions of humanity and consciousness that come up with this concept, but as mentioned, the game does little to explore this aside from the very trite and repetitive plotline of, "Oh no, my daughter/wife/friend is a synth, what is there to do?" There's plenty the game could have done with this history, but the Railroad appear directionless aside from the basic actions they take to protect synths from the Institute and other anti-robot factions. There are synths within its ranks, but both the faction's leader and designated companion, who is the best in the game by the way, are both human, and they have little to say about the struggle of synths aside from the basic spiel of their agency and freedom or whatever. Ultimately, the game's attempt to parallel real-life abolition to the struggle of synthetic humanoids for agency comes across somehow more tasteless than Detroit Become Humans, as the existence of the Railroad is rooted in the history of a real-life organization that was foundational to the early abolitionist movement in the United States. But hey, at least their headquarters is cool. Fallout 4 is a game I sincerely adore. Bethesda Softworks excels at making fun environments to explore, and having a version of that in my home region will never not be fun and thrilling. Even the Boston accents in it are pretty accurate, something that can't be said for other popular media based in the region, Shutter Island, for example.
There was a fire at the apartment building while I was at work.
Fallout 4 could have earned itself a spot among the greats if it devoted more time to utilizing the thematic background of the franchise to say something about the region's history, and ideally, its future. Unfortunately, the game's writers aren't willing to go beyond the bare minimum of aesthetic inclusion of the city's history, making its choice of setting seem ultimately inconsequential to its narrative direction. But, hey, I'm just an overeducated 19-year-old, don't take my word for it. Play the game yourself if you don't care too much about the writing aspect. Better yet, play Fallout New Vegas first, it's cheaper and just more fun as an RPG in general, and then see for yourself how the games compare. I wrote this essay for a class, so I'm using this video to get back into the groove of this kind of thing. I appreciate you sticking around to watch for so long, and I'm very grateful for any comments, likes, or subscriptions you, the almighty viewer, may grant me. Have a great rest of your day and week.